Right, in this video we're going to talk about the 500,000 mile truck. Anybody see that squirrel? I hate them. They've been just jacking up my cars. I've got tons of traps and bait, and they just keep coming from that field over there. But anyway, let's talk about the 500,000 mile truck. This is not it. Maybe I'll pop a video in here at some point showing you the truck in the 34-foot trailer that my buddy Frank has, and he's been towing with that with a Duramax. It has been his last truck. He's had Dodges, he's had Chevy, or he's had Fords, and then finally he was like, Mike, I need something that doesn't have as many issues. So I said, listen, try and find a Duramax 2005 to 2008 without the DEF system on it. So first thing, we're going to talk about the other trucks, and we'll talk about the Duramax at the end. What happened with his first Duramax, he had two, and the first one was not the truck that was the problem. It was a faulty part that he got that actually ruined the truck. So we'll talk about that. And these are things that if you own a Duramax, you're going to want to check out towards the end of the video when I go over those things, because these are things that you need to know so that you don't have the same problem that he did. So he started out with a couple different Dodges, and he had a lot of transmission issues, and blown, they just didn't handle that kind of weight. If you have a Dodge, or you want to buy a Dodge, the old 12 valve with the stick shift trans and dually, the heavy duty rear end, those are probably the best ones. And he didn't have that. He had a regular rear axle. The rear axle would go out. I don't know how many rear ends he did and transmissions. He finally just couldn't. It was just so expensive. It was cheaper just to go to a different truck. So then he got a 7.3. 7.3 is probably the best Ford. Of course, I'm not 100% brand loyal. I do have a 7.3, but I really do feel like these are the best all-around engineered truck. There are problems with them, like all of them do, but the 7.3 that he had issues with the transmission. He had to replace injectors. It was nickeling, dying him, all the little oil leaks and other little things like that. When you're towing daily, it's really hard to deal with all those things. So he had those problems, and eventually the engine started to have issues as well, and he had to get rid of the 7.3. I think he had the 7.3 for probably the longest. He had about 200,000 miles. So a good engine, but again, the rest of the truck, just issues with nitpicky little things, breaking under the hood that, like the turbo flapper, I could go on. You guys that have 7.3s, you really do know what the problems are. A lot of guys are in denial of them, but there are issues. But the base engine platform is pretty good. Just the transmission issues and other things. And the cooler would leak into the transmission oil, all that stuff. You guys know that have automatics. I don't have an automatic. Mine's a stick shift. So I couldn't tell you all those things. I wouldn't buy a stick shift one personally. But anyway, or an automatic one personally. That was the reason I bought that truck, because it was stick. So anyway, after numerous problems with that, he ended up getting a 6.7 Ford. Now, you guys that don't know, they have the CP4 fuel pump in them. And there's no room to put a CP3 in them. Like the GM 2010 to 2017 had the CP4 fuel pump. You can update it to the CP3, and it basically eliminates the fuel pressure, fuel issues, where they say it's, Bosch and some of the other places that defend their product say that it's actually that you get contaminated fuel. Honestly, if you've seen videos on taking apart the CP4 fuel pump, you will see that it is a poorly engineered part for that kind of pressure. It has like a cam lobe and a roller lifter, and the roller lifter can go sideways, and then that's when your issues all start, and there's nothing to stop it from doing that. So it's going to do it at some point. So the only thing you can do on a Ford is put a little screen in on your fuel, and when it finally does go, it's going to just plug up that screen, and you're going to be stuck wherever you're at. Pulling a 34-foot trailer with that issue is not advisable to me. That's like you're stuck on the side of the road with a fuel pressure issue. I've seen several of these things with this problem. He did not have that problem. He had something that they say isn't a problem called the sewing machine noise. And a lot of people say, oh, the sewing machine noise, you just ignore it. Okay, no, don't ignore it. What it is he also, before that, he had a DEF system failure, and it was a $9,000 repair. So he elected to remove the DEF system, which a lot of guys do because of that cost issue, and it's usually going to be an issue continual over and over. So he removed the DEF system out and straight piped it. Then he didn't have that issue anymore. But I also believe that possibly the damage that came to his engine was partly from that. So he had a 6.7 and he had sort of having tappet noise. And again, if you look on forums, they say ignore it. It's no big thing. They all do it or whatever. But because of the valley system and the exhaust being on the top of the engine, I believe that the heat buildup from that causes the lifters to collapse, and that's what was happening. His lifter actually did collapse. We found out when he was on the road. To do that, I don't recall. I've not done the repair. I don't own a 6.7. I won't own a 6.7, but because of things I've seen, too many issues. You have to pull the intake manifold off to change the lifters, or the exhaust manifold off, the center of the engine, because the exhaust goes through the top of the engine. Unlike most other engines, they made it backwards to kind of. I understand the idea of that, get it directly to the turbo, but the heat in that valley is the parabolic valley, and you have all that heat. It's just like you put up a dish to the sun, right? And the center of that dish gets super hot. Well, the same thing happens when you're in a valley in the desert or whatever. The center of the valley gets really hot. That's what Death Valley is, okay? And I think that's where the push rods are, right? And it made the lifter get too hot, and it started to have issues and collapse. The hydraulic lifter did. Well, that wore the push rods, wore the valve train, and the intake manifold needed to come off, or not intake manifold, it's the exhaust. I always think backwards because I don't work on those. But anyway, and it was a major repair. It was $5,000, and this was, he was aware of the fuel system potentially going out, so he just decided that it was better just to move on to another truck. Towing business, doing hauling, is a really tough business, you guys. He does use ship. It's very competitive. Right now it's very hard to make money in that business, if you guys don't know. So don't be judgmental of someone who's just trying to make a living, okay? Really hard to make a living. So what he did is he took the remaining money he had and bought a Duramax pickup truck on my suggestion. I was like, they have issues. We know the front end has issues on these. Front end's very weak. You're gonna have to change the tie rod ends, ball joints, and front end stuff, but in all honesty, almost any backyard mechanic can do those things, okay? But not very many backyard mechanics can take the intake manifold off and replace lifters on a 6.7 and then, put in a filter screen and replace a CP4. Those are major repairs, okay? So he's not a mechanic, okay? But he can change all the front end parts. He's done all that. So my suggestion was go Duramax. I think you'll have the best luck. The Duramax Allison is a pretty reliable platform. It's not perfect, okay? GM has issues with, obviously, you guys know about the Delphi ignition problems, the wiring issues that have these trucks. But they're manageable things. They're things that aren't going to leave you on the side of the road, broke down, can't move, can't do anything with a 34-foot trailer. The other issues on the Duramax, which I tell you, if you have one, only ever put a Delco water pump on, because this is what happened to him. And his water pump went out, and it's a pretty good sized job to do. I would suggest every 100,000 miles, replace your water pump with an OEM spec water pump, 100% OEM. So he had an 08 before the 05 that you've seen, that has over 500,000 miles. It's like 543,000 miles. I mean, he's driving it right now, so it's going to be, we're expecting more than 600,000 miles in the next 6 months. And I'm sure the truck is going to do it. It runs fine. So he had a water pump go out on the road. He went to an AutoZone, which is, again, bad idea. But when he's on the road, that's why I say replace it in advance. Do it on a maintenance schedule so you're not stuck on the side of the road replacing your water pump, especially when you're pulling weight. Okay, and he put a water pump on it. The water pump was so bad that the water pump design on these is crap. Okay, it's a joke. Okay, it's an issue, but it's manageable if you can replace the water pump, like I said, on intervals, and put an AC Delco water pump in it. It's not going to be an issue. So the water pump we got, the weep hole in the water pump went to the oil. The factory water pump, the weep hole comes out where it will just leak on the ground. This one leaked into the oil. So coolant was leaking into the oil. Now, another issue with the Duramax is that if you have the, and these are things that I learned from his mistakes, which I've taken care of, and this is something that you guys who are Duramax owners take advantage of these things and learn from this. He had an oil cooler leak. Well, the oil cooler, they thought it was an oil cooler leak because the oil cooler leaks into the return. So generally, if you have pressurized oil, it's higher pressure than coolant, right? Because it's maybe 40 to 60 pounds. Coolant's maybe 15 pounds. So the oil will leak into the coolant on a pressure side. But on the return, where they have the oil cooler on these is based on the return of the oil. It goes through the oil cooler, which is cooled by coolant from the radiator, and that can leak coolant into your oil on these. So very important, you always watch your dipstick for coolant. So every time he fills up the fuel on his, even on his truck today, he takes this off and looks to see if there's any milk on there. If you see a little bit of milk, you know that there's coolant probably in the oil. Every time he stops for fuel, he checks his oil. He checks his coolant. He always checks all of his fluid levels every time. He's monitoring all that stuff all the time. Very important that you guys do that. Not a bad practice on any vehicle. So, he saw coolant in the oil. And so he went to a shop and they said, hey, it's got to be because normally the water pump would leak onto the ground. Okay, it would not normally leak into the oil. It can happen, but it usually goes through the weep hole. The weep hole goes out onto the ground, gives you indication that the water pump's bad. He didn't get that because the weep hole on the poorly made product from AutoZone, I don't know who the manufacturer is, but it doesn't matter. If you stay with AC Delco, then you don't have to worry about that. It was leaking onto the ground. Okay, it was not leaking on the ground, it was leaking into the oil. Well, they thought it would be the oil cooler because that's the most common thing. If you get coolant in your oil, it's probably going to be the oil cooler. So they replaced the oil cooler, and he thought it was fine. They changed the oil, and he continued to drive it. He drove it a ways further, noticed more coolant getting in the oil. And I told him, I said, listen, I think it's your water pump. He's calling me, you know, I'm telling him, hey, I think it's your water pump. Don't drive it. Pull over, change the water pump. I'm sure that's what it is. Well, you know, pulling the load, he ended up going a little too far, and about 60 miles further than he should have. And, you know, the truck still ran. I mean, it literally had like 50-60% coolant in the oil. Okay, Duramax still ran, still brought boost on. It still pulled the hills a little bit, but he said he was losing power, and I'm like, dude, you're losing your engine. So the engine ended up needing to be rebuilt. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. It still ran. The truck still ran. I mean, how many vehicles would run with 50% coolant in the water, in the oil? Not many. I don't think a 7.3 would even handle that. And they're pretty tough. Okay, this thing did. Okay, he had it was an 08. Okay, really good engine in those. So we got to it too late, and it damaged the turbo. And he's like, "Do you think the bottom end's bad?" I said, "Dude, I would definitely want to rebuild the whole thing at that point." So, or just get another used engine, put it in. It was looking for another used engine. And then he contacted, you know, AutoZone. They did actually give him a settlement. What wasn't near enough. It wasn't enough to replace the engine. So he did get money from them. It did help him out. But he ended up using that money to make a down payment on the truck that he has now, the $500,000 truck. So he bought the truck with, you know, used with some miles on it, and the guy who he got it from had been using it for towing all the time too. And he was like, "Man, this thing has a lot of miles on it," or, you know, and I said, "No, it'll be fine." So he's continued to pull all this time with that truck, hundreds of thousands of miles, more than the Ford, more than the Dodge. Sorry guys, if you own one of those trucks, I'm not trying to say anything bad about them, but this thing has been really, really good. He's had zero transmission problems. But again, you guys, he has a bully dog tuner in it, but he does not push the engine going up hills. He turns the tuner off when he's climbing. He tries to maintain a 2,500 RPM when he's climbing hills. Keep the RPMs low, not push it. The turbo's never been replaced. 500,000 miles on the turbo, 543,000 to be exact. And the injectors have never been out of it. But it's, again, because it's his only way to make a living. So he doesn't push the truck. He doesn't, he's pushing it every day, pulling 34-foot trailer, you know, whatever, 12,000 pounds all the time, plus the weight of the truck, it's working. Okay, it's not easy for that truck, but because he doesn't try and power the thing up at 1,200 horsepower in it, climb the hills floored with the tuner tuned up to max and all that, like guys do, the truck lasts. So one of the points is powering your stuff up and all that stuff. It's fun, whatever, but you're taking a life away from it. And if you're using it for work and you're trying to make a living using it, it's not a good idea. You want to just have fun. That's up to you. But he has had very few issues with the truck. Of course, he's replaced the water pump with AC Delco. He's had to do hoses. He's had to do the front end 2 or 3 times. We all know that that's a weak point in the Chevy. Anybody who knows, you know, Ford guys all say it. I know it is. It's a crappy front end. We know that. But it works. It's something that's manageable. You can replace the parts. It's not expensive to do. A little key thing, Moog idler arm. #1 thing to do if you want it to last a little longer. The axle seals eventually started to leak. Replace those, of course. No bearings. no rear end replacements. I think he's probably did U-joints in it. I don't know. He's done a lot of smaller things to it, but again, it's because I said to him, I said, baby that sucker, man, don't drive it like an old man. He's like, yeah, I am an old man. He's, you know, not that old, but you know, he's a little older than me. He's like 63 now, so he doesn't push the truck really super hard, jump out of the gate into the floor, blowing black smoke. You know, he doesn't do that. He drives it like a normal, like if he was driving a semi. And a lot of guys go, well, you should get a semi. Well, listen, if you know anything about California, if you come in California and you've got more than 14,000 pounds GVWR, you've got to have a 2010 or newer truck, and it's subject to inspection, even if it's from out of state. Okay, it doesn't matter. They're really strict about this crap here. All right, it's stupid. There's no reason for it. You can comment about that as well. Oh yeah, we're saving the environment. Yeah, you're crushing trucks. That's great for the environment. Send them to another state, let them pollute over there. Oh, okay, yeah, that really helps. But yeah, it's a legit 540,000 miles, towing about 90% of the time. He tows 100% of the time. He lives in that truck. He drives it. He goes to a hotel, sleeps. He doesn't have a house. He's homeless. He drives his truck. You know, you can't pay rent today. Look how much rent is in California. That's where he used to live. He couldn't afford to pay rent, okay? Because he barely makes enough money towing to live. So he's got to have a reliable truck. And the Duramax has done it, you guys. It has proven itself. The overall. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. But for towing every day, I think it's probably one of the best trucks to own. If you own a 05 to 08, all those years in there, they had a lot less issues, especially when you don't power them up. If you're powering them up, the 08 I think is probably the best one. The one he had first, if that thing wouldn't have blown the water pump, he'd be still driving it right now. I know 100% that it would be driven right now. If that water pump issue didn't happen, and it wasn't the truck's fault. It wasn't the engineers that built its fault. It was the engineer of that poorly built part that had the weep hole that went into the oil. They just didn't understand what they were making in China or wherever they made it. And that was the issue. It should have never leaked from the weep hole into the oil. It shouldn't do that. Normally they don't. But it can happen. So that's why you check your oil. And that's why you check all these things for coolant in it. You check your oil level. If you see your oil level going up, you know something's wrong. Okay, either you got fuel going in your oil or you've got coolant going in your oil. You got to find that out, because that pickup is down low and it'll pick the water up before it'll pick the oil up. And usually you'll know because you see milk in the stick, or like the cap I showed you. So if you keep an eye on those things, and I've seen guys say the head gaskets were bad and all this stuff, and a lot of times those were the issues they had. It was coolant leaking in the oil from the oil cooler, coolant leaking in oil from the water pump, and they're replacing the head gaskets. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. I'm sure it can, and especially if you overheat it. But he's never overheated his truck. He knows to pull over and cool it down or whatever. He just won't, because it's the only truck he's got. It's the only way he can make a living. So anyway, I thought I'd tell you guys a story on that, since we made some shorts and people are interested in it. And hopefully it helps you guys that own Duramaxes, and hope I didn't offend anyone with a Ford, but it's just the truth, guys. It is what it is. I'll talk to you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.